And we are going to start with one of the key issues that is being discussed at the debate, which of course is, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? It's the old adage. It's something that Reagan in particular was very effective at when he was running for president. If you go back and look at some of the videos in the Reagan Library channel on YouTube, particularly when he was running in 1980, what you will find in particular is he really harped on this idea of, well, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? I can't say that for certain, and, you know, I will let you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's kind of what it comes down to. I doubt there will be a second debate. So here we go.
Better off than you were 4 years ago. When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid. And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America. I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy. Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. My passion, one of them, is small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy. My opponent, on the other hand, his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year, because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
Terrible answer for a number of reasons. The first one, of course, is that she didn't answer the question, which is, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? So rather than actually answer that, she basically talks about a convoluted approach to how she thinks she's going to change things. Now, listen, I would like to say that we live in a country where we actually have an opportunity to have real systemic change regarding the tax system and the tax code. But the tax code, the tax system benefits the rich and the rich only, and it's written by and for the rich. There are more billionaires in Kamala's corner than there is in Trump's corner. So when you answer the question and you frame it in the sense that Trump is going to benefit the billionaire class, the answer is yes, he will, and so will you. And the reason I know this is because anytime there's been a substantial tax cut in the history of this country, the Republicans do it and the Democrats ensure that it stays. That's what's happened over the last 40 years. And it really accelerated with the Bush tax cuts made permanent by Obama, and then the Trump tax cuts, which have essentially been made permanent by Biden, and to the extent, Vice President Harris. Years ago, it used to be considered an accepted practice or a necessary practice that when you're talking about a specific issue, that framing it from the perspective of a heartfelt personal story is considered a way to connect with voters. I'm going to tell you about my cousin and how great they were and how they made me feel. And all I'm thinking is, yeah, that's nice, but I really don't know how that's going to help me in any way. So tell me, how's it going to help me? So the two issues that you talked about, which again, I would say is all that she should have addressed instead of, juking and jiving and going after Trump the way that she did, or turning it into a personal story, which of course was not necessary. The $6,000 tax cut. And again, if you say tax cut for the middle class, the working class, that's good. But you also have to say, how are we going to do this? Because if you're going to say that we're going to do a tax cut, which by anyone's economic measure that we have, at least the ones that people talk about, is it's only going to increase the deficit more by saying we're going to do a tax cut for the billionaires, but we're going to do a tax cut for the middle class. That's going to have the same effect, is it not? Now, I have been of the mind, and I still believe, that if you're going to actually address the systemic crisis that is the economic system that is broken pretty much beyond repair at this point in this country, you have to go to the source, and you have to go right back to where it began, to where the actual problem started. And that problem started with reducing the top marginal tax rate from 72% down to 28%, and it's pretty much been there ever since. It accelerated under Reagan. It was brought up ever so slightly, and that was one of the few things that Clinton did that I think was good during his administration, but slowly but surely reduced lower and lower and lower again. The rich get away with it. There is never a talk about raising the top marginal tax rate, ever. And if they're ever talking about raising the top marginal tax rate, it is of the slightest amount. Slightest amount. There isn't even a talk of even going anywhere near what it once was, which would actually balance things and make the dollar more valuable. The dollar would go further. A living wage would be much more obtainable. It's almost like you got a new billionaire being born every minute, every week. That's not normal. And everyone knows it isn't. So if what you're going to talk about is how we're going to do very marginal changes, that's great. You want to offer a $50,000 tax incentive for somebody to start a small business? How are you going to enforce that at the federal level when we all know that, especially in blue states, starting a small business is a nightmare? Try it in California. See how long it takes you. I've heard stories that it can take 6 months to a year. I've heard in crazy situations in states like Texas, it can take a few weeks. Now, we need a balance, obviously, because there are businesses that should not just be given carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want. We know that's one of the big problems we have in this economic system. What we also have is a lot of bureaucratic red tape. That, to me, is where a lot of this starts and a lot of it ends. But as I've said, the problem that we run into is whether or not we're talking about these issues that are actually going to make a fundamental change. But when you are, and Kamala is, completely bought by corporate special interests, you're going to get these fluffy tales about how we're going to make life better for the working and middle class, but we all know that's not going to happen. Because they'll ask the parliamentarian if they could do anything, and we all know what the answer is going to be. So let's hear what the Donald has to say about what he's going to do.
President Trump, I'll give you 2 minutes.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because it was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. we were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon.
So here's the thing about Trump. He is extremely hyperbolic. He says everything like he's P.T. Barnum, as I've said forever. When he says that we're facing the worst inflation in the history of our country, no, we are not facing the worst inflation in the history of our country. That is a lie. We have been through much worse periods of inflation. Thank you, Donald. I really appreciate you coming by. But I will say this. I have not seen enough yet to agree or disagree. But remember, a lot of people are watching this with a very tinted lens. I'm only focused on the issues. I don't give a fuck what impression she makes. I don't care if she puts her hand on her chin and is making gestures in his direction. And let me tell you something. He stood there stoically for the entire 2 minutes that she spoke, and she is meanwhile making faces at him while he's speaking. It's not a good look. Don't do that. Now, for the most part, he's full of it. He's just going to continue down this very, disaster everywhere, and I'm totally going to fix the problem if you put me back in there again. It seems to me that the real issue here is going to really come down to, did people feel better with him in the White House economically than they did with Biden for the last 4 years? And that's something that I don't think Harris is going to be able to shake. That's going to be a very big issue when it comes to people voting. Especially in certain key swing states where economically they've been dealing with big problems. And so the inflation issue is a huge problem, as is immigration. And so what was pointed out to me, and I agree that this is probably something that's going to be very consistent over the course of the debate, is the fact that Trump is going to talk about immigration and inflation over and over and over again. And the reason he's doing that is because those are the key issues. That's how it is. So, doom and gloom is the MO for what Trump will always say whenever he's not in power. And Harris will not take any responsibility for the current state of the economy, of which she has been the second in command for the past almost 4 years. So what both of them are attempting to do is distance themselves from Biden as far as possible, but at the same time, also take responsibility in a positive way if they sense that there's something good to talk about, which so far it doesn't seem like there really is. Remember to go over to patreon.com/generational change for as little as $5 a month. You can become a supporter of our small but mighty channel.